Hello and welcome to the Math Success Workshop. In this workshop, we'll be just giving some basic advice on things you can do to be successful in a college math class. All right, so some of the topics we'll talk about is, what you can do before and during class, how you can take notes effectively, how to use your math textbook, tips for doing homework, tips for studying for math tests and quizzes, how to seek help and where to seek help if you need it, and also good and bad habits, or habits of good and bad math students. All right, so this will cover, this will go over several videos. In this first video here, we're just going to be talking about the first topic here, what to do during class, things that you could be doing in class that might help you be more successful. All right, so to start off, a question for you to consider, what do you do before class starts? Right, you come into the classroom, class doesn't start for another 4, 5, 6 minutes. What do you do? All right, and then how could you maybe make better use of that time? All right, so if you want to maybe pause the recording here and just think about it for a little bit and answer those questions for yourselves, it might be a good idea, something to think about. What I usually see when students come into the class as a teacher, mostly I see students just come in, put down their stuff, and then take out their phone and sit there and play with their phone. Right? Or sometimes they'll actually talk to other people and talk to their classmates. Sometimes, if there's a homework assignment due, I'll see a student come in and then the last 2 minutes before class starts, try to real quick finish that homework assignment. None of those are real good uses of the time before class. Now, what do you do during class? Right? How could you make better use of class time? Again, things I see students doing in class: sleeping sometimes, daydreaming, which is basically sleeping but with your eyes open, playing with a phone in class or playing with a laptop during class, staring at the clock, waiting for class to end, sometimes doing work or studying for another class. Again, those things, if you're doing those things during your math class, that might be one of the reasons why you don't do so well in math, or maybe not as well as you would want to do. So let's talk about what we can be doing instead of these things that I just mentioned. All right, so first off, try to get to class early if possible, right? If class starts at 10 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to be walking in the door at 10 o'clock or at 10:01 or 10:02. You want to try to get there at least a few minutes before class starts. Now, depending on where your last class was and how far away it is and how long it takes to walk to get there, sometimes that's not always possible, but try to always get to class early if you can. The earlier you get to class, you get your first pick of where to sit, and you want to sit somewhere where you can clearly see the board, right? You want to be able to see what's written on the board, especially in a math class. Teachers in math tend to write a lot of stuff on the board, and usually the stuff that they write on the board is pretty important. So you want to be able to see it clearly and write it down as you go along. So another thing you can do before class starts, if you get there early enough, review the previous notes from the last class. Right? If you get to class and you're just playing with your phone and then you're talking to people and then your teacher's like, all right, it's 10 o'clock, it's time for class to start, you're not ready to go. Right? And that's actually what the next thing there says: be ready when class starts with your materials out. All right? Get into class, put down your bag or whatever, take out your notebook, your book if you need it, your calculator if you use that in class, take out something to write with, open up your notebook. That way when your teacher's ready to go at the time the class starts, you're ready to go as well. You don't want your teacher to be like, okay, time for class to start, and then they start talking and teaching things, and now you're trying to dig out your notebook and put away your phone and do all this other stuff, because now you're not really paying attention to what that teacher is saying, right? And the first couple minutes of class are usually pretty important, because that's where your teacher is either reminding you of important things that are going on, or just kind of setting you up for today's class and letting you know what you're going to be doing today. And if you're not listening to that stuff, you're missing some key information. Right, so you want to be ready when class starts, and a great way to make sure you do that is like the third thing on the list. When you get to the class, take out your notebook right away and just kind of go back a couple pages and just kind of review what you did the past couple classes. Look at the notes, the definitions, formulas, or whatever. Look at the examples you did in class. In most math classes, the material builds on itself, so the things you did in your last class are probably going to be continued in this coming class, or what's coming up today's class is going to be built on what came previously. All right, so if you review that that previous stuff that you did, it helps you to kind of focus your mind on what you're doing, get your mind kind of into that math mode, and also get you kind of set up for what's going to be coming up today. All right, so a real good idea to do that before class rather than just sitting there playing with your phone the whole time. Take out your notebook, be ready to go when your teacher starts talking, and review those notes so you have an idea of what you've been doing and kind of gives you an idea of where you're going. Put away distractions. Again, put away the phone, put away the laptop if you're not using it for class. The more distracted you are, the less apt you are to pay attention, and the more trouble you're going to have. During class time, stay in the room. Sometimes you have to go to the bathroom, and that's okay if you really have to go. But if you can hold it until the end of class, then try to hold it till the end of class. Right? You never know when during class your teacher's going to say something super important that you need to know. And if you get up and use the restroom, even if it's just for 2 or 3 minutes, you might have missed one of those important things. You might have missed a key example that your teacher did that's going to be on a quiz or a test coming up soon. And if you get up and leave class, you just miss it. Right? And I know sometimes it's uncomfortable sometimes to sit there if you do need to use the restroom, or if you're like really thirsty and you need to get something to drink. But guess what? Your teachers have to use the restroom all the time in the middle of class. But they hold it till the end of the class, right? They don't just walk out in the middle of class and be like, I'll be back in a couple of minutes, I gotta pee. Like they stand there and they keep doing their job, no matter what. So as a student, you should be sitting there and doing your job no matter what. Unless it's an extreme emergency, you need to try to stay in the classroom. Focus on what's going on in the classroom, right? Sometimes when I was a student, to be honest, in classes that weren't that interesting to me, I would usually pick a seat by the window and then just kind of sit there and stare out the window during class and look at the trees and the birds and the butterflies and stuff. That was usually more interesting to me than what was going on in some of the classes I took. But if you want to be a good student, you should not do those things I just said that I used to do. Focus on what's going on in the classroom. Like, focus on listening to what your teacher is saying, or if other students are talking or asking questions, focus on what they're saying. Keep your eyes focused on your teacher or your other students or what's being written on the board. Listening and participating in class are real good ways to help you stay focused. Another thing you can do to help you stay focused is to ask questions during class, right? Part of class time is not just listening to what the teacher says, but it's also, clarifying what the teacher says. If he or she says something that you don't quite understand, it's okay to ask questions. Like, hey, can you explain that a little further, or can you show us another example of this? Right? Rather than just sitting there and saying, well, that didn't make any sense, so, oh well, I'll just listen to what the next thing they say. Like I said, math material tends to build on itself, so if you don't catch something along the way, stop and ask so that you get it, so that you're kind of set up for what's coming later. All right, another good thing to do during class time is to take notes, right? Don't just sit there with an empty desk in front of you. I mean, listening to the teacher is great if you just sit there and listen the whole time, but writing things down is important as well. And we'll talk a little bit later in another video as part of this workshop about how to take notes effectively. Right? But these are all things that are good to do in the classroom, during class time and before class time. Right? So if there's things on this list that you don't do, well, maybe you should try to start doing those things a little bit and just kind of see how it feels, see how it works, see if it makes you a little bit more comfortable in class, or see if you start doing better in class. These are just, like I said, suggestions, things that you could do to possibly help you out and make you do better. All right. Some things that you should not be doing during class. Sleeping. All right, this one seems pretty obvious. If you're sleeping during class, you're not really listening to what's going on. You're obviously not writing notes down, and you're missing important stuff. Right? And I've had students before, with their heads down, they were totally asleep, and I'll say, hey, wake up. Like, oh, I was awake. I just had my eyes closed. They weren't awake. Right? They weren't paying attention. They weren't taking notes. You got to stay awake during class. Other thing not to do, play with your phone or your laptop. Again, if you're being distracted by those things, you're not fully engaged in class, and you're not really fully aware of what's going on, and you're probably going to miss some important information that your teacher's telling you. Doing work for another class. Another thing that you should really not be doing during your math class, really during any class, right? If you're sitting in math class, you should not be reading Shakespeare or writing, a history paper, nothing against Shakespeare or history, but they don't really belong in a math class, right? Just like if you're sitting in history class, you shouldn't be sitting there doing your math homework, right? Because then you're not really engaged in what's going on in the class that you're in at that moment, all right? So your work for other classes, get it done outside of class time, so that when you're in your math class, you are focused on math, and that's what you're doing for that length of time that you're there. Daydreaming, again, another thing. Try to keep focused on what's going on in class. All of our minds wander now and again. It happens. But try to keep an eye on yourself. And if you find your mind start to wander, do something to get yourself back on track. Even if you have to slap yourself in the face and have your other students and probably your teacher laugh at you. Better to do that and to pay attention than to just daydream the entire class and have no idea what's going on. Right? Another thing you should not do during class is pack up early. This is one of those things I see students do sometimes that really drives me crazy. There'll be like 5 minutes left in class and we're still working on stuff and I'm still like doing an example on the board and there's going to be another example after this one that we're going to do at the end of class, and I see a student fold up their notebook and put it away and put it back in their bag and put their pencil away and then just sit there with an empty desk for the last couple minutes of class. Well, they're not doing what they need to be doing, right? They're not writing down the examples. They're not taking the notes they need to do. Things that happen, if your class is, let's say, an hour long, the things that happen in the first few minutes are very important, right? Like we talked about before. The things that happen in the middle of class are important. The things that happen in the end of class are just as important, right? I don't know of any teachers who, for the last 5 minutes of class, just talk about, irrelevant things that have nothing to do with the class. It's important from start to finish, so you need to be there on time or early if possible, be ready to go when class starts, and be paying attention and focusing on the things happening in the classroom right up until class is over. And then you pack up your stuff and you leave. All right? So, again, some things you can do, some things you should not be doing in class, and if you find, or like this list I just went through, if you're like, oh yeah, I do all these things in class all the time, try to stop doing those things and go back to that list that I had up here a few minutes ago, things that you should be doing in class. Try to do some other of those things instead. And like I said, they're just some suggestions. See what works for you, see what doesn't work. And you might find if you stop doing the things on this list and start doing some of the things on the other list, you might find yourself start getting better grades in your math class. All right, so this is, like I said, this has been the first part of this workshop of what to do during class. So I'm going to stop this one here, but then I'm going to do another video, part 2, where we talk about taking notes and how to take notes effectively, and then what to do with your notes after you take notes in class. All right, so make sure you check out that other video that I'm about to do with more advice on things to do to help you do better in your math classes.